Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something that really shapes how we view the world. These global rankings and indices, often dominated by Western institutions.
That's right. A listener pointed us towards a YouTube video. It's called 8D10 CR Ki, and it digs into this whole phenomenon.
So our mission today is to kind of unpack that. We want to look at how these rankings are actually put together.
Yeah, what are the motivations behind them? And, the big question, do they really give us an objective view of what's going on globally?
Definitely. And the video, it kicks off with a really potent example, doesn't it? That Bloomberg COVID-19 resilience ranking.
Oh, yeah. That one really got people talking. The U.S. ranked #1. It certainly raised a lot of eyebrows.
It absolutely did. Sparked a huge amount of criticism, made people question what these things are really measuring. So, okay, let's dive in. From your perspective, what are these rankings fundamentally about? What purpose do they serve?
Well, it's interesting. They're not just simple comparisons. They actively define power, discourse power, you could say. They shape how we even talk about countries.
So they influence the narrative.
Exactly. And they carry political weight, definitely commercial interests too. I mean, just the act of creating a ranking means you decide what's important, what metrics matter, who gets to set the standard. That's key.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about who's #1, but defining what #1 even looks like.
Precisely. And, this isn't entirely new, setting standards, making comparisons.
Yeah.
It goes way back. Think about ancient empires like Qin Han or Rome standardizing weights.
Right,
measured.
creating uniformity.
And then fast forward to the modern era, global trade, industrialization that just amplified the need for global standards, and with it, rankings.
So ancient history to modern capitalism, there's this recurring need to measure and compare. But what's really pushing it today? What are the sort of main engines?
Looking at it now, you can probably boil it down to two main things. First, the obvious one. Advertising, commercial needs. Companies want to show they're the best. Rankings look objective.
Okay, so marketing plays a big role.
A huge role. And second, it's more practical maybe. The need for objective standards just to run things efficiently. Factories, modern cities. You need benchmarks, metrics to know if things are working.
Right. Everything from selling products to, like you said, making sure the trains run on time.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe early on, people trusted these rankings more, saw them as factual.
I think so, yeah. There was likely a time when something like, say, the Guinness World Records was seen as just, recording reality. But that's shifted.
How so?
Well, there's much more skepticism now. People are starting to realize, hang on, the criteria they use, the data they pick, how they interpret it, it can all be shaped by an agenda.
So the subjectivity creeps in.
Absolutely. Choosing metrics, weighting them, it's inherently subjective. And that makes them, potentially easy to manipulate for a certain story. Which brings us right back to that Bloomberg COVID ranking.
Yeah, the source video really zooms in on that one. What did you find most revealing about the critique it presented?
The most obvious thing, I think, was how the methodology seemed, tailored. Tailored to get a specific result, which in this case was putting the U.S. in a good light.
How did they do that?
By removing key indicators, things like confirmed COVID cases and deaths, at a time when the U.S. numbers were, frankly, very high. That's a pretty clear move.
Wow. Okay. So you just take out the inconvenient data points.
Right.
And the video said they added new metrics instead.
That's right. Things like how fast economies were reopening, vaccination rates, freedom of travel. Stuff like that.
Which sound relevant, I guess, but...
But they conveniently shifted focus away from, the core issue of controlling the virus's spread. And then they also included metrics that generally favor Western countries anyway, like GDP per capita, Human Development Index.
Right. Stacking the deck, perhaps.
It certainly looks that way. It really makes you question the assumptions baked into a lot of these standard metrics we just accept.
It feels like they cherry-picked the data to paint a very specific, maybe flattering picture. And the video pointed out how unstable the ranking was, right? It changed quickly.
Yes, that's another really interesting point. The U.S. was first, then suddenly, I think it was in a July update, they dropped to 5th. Norway went to the top. China was 9th.
So it wasn't exactly a stable measure.
Not at all, which makes you wonder how reliable it ever was.
The video even brought up the cost difference for COVID tests, U.S. versus China, and how that affects GDP.
Yeah, that's a great little anecdote because it highlights how misleading GDP can be. If tests cost way more in the U.S., that bumps up the GDP figure. But does it mean better health outcomes?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Possibly even the opposite if cost is a barrier.
Exactly. It shows how just looking at GDP can give you a skewed picture of, actual well-being or resilience.
And the source makes the claim that Shanghai actually outperforms New York on several measures, despite lower per capita GDP. Things like household assets, life expectancy.
Social security, infrastructure, yeah, even pandemic control. That comparison directly challenges the idea that per capita GDP is the be-all and end-all measure of success.
It suggests other things matter just as much, or more.
Like strong social safety nets, public health systems, effective government action. These can lead to better outcomes, even with a different economic number attached.
The timing was also pretty damning, wasn't it? The video mentioned how the whole reopening metric fell apart when the Delta variant hit the U.S. hard in August 2021.
Right. Suddenly, cases and deaths were spiking again in the U.S., which kind of undermined that whole narrative they'd built the ranking around.
It shows the danger of focusing on short-term economics over public health fundamentals.
And how quickly a selective narrative can crumble when reality bites back.
So it's maybe not surprising that, according to the video, Chinese netizens kind of saw the ranking as a joke?
Understandably, yeah. The gap between the ranking and what people were actually experiencing, both inside and outside the U.S., probably made it hard to take seriously.
And then there's the flip side. The ranking apparently viewed China's strict lockdowns negatively.
Even though they were, by many accounts, very effective in controlling the virus initially.
So that suggests a bias in the methodology itself.
It seems to. Maybe valuing individual movement over collective health outcomes or effectiveness of control. It reflects a different set of priorities, perhaps.
The video even suggests the U.S. was a major source of international spread, which the ranking ignored.
That's a crucial point. If you only look at domestic policy and ignore the global impact, you're getting a very incomplete picture, potentially a distorted one.
The argument in the source, then, is that the Bloomberg ranking ultimately showed a system prioritizing business interests over lives.
That's the interpretation presented, yes.
Yeah.
That the methodology was perhaps geared towards supporting an economic recovery narrative, maybe aligned with certain capital interests, even at a potential public health cost.
And maybe a fear, underneath it all, that China's success in handling COVID might undermine Western soft power.
That geopolitical angle is definitely raised. If a non-Western model proves effective in a global crisis, it can challenge the perceived superiority of established Western approaches.
Okay, so Bloomberg wasn't the only ranking criticized. The video also brings up the Global Health Security Index from Johns Hopkins from 2019.
Right, and the timing on that one is quite something. It ranked the U.S. #1 for pandemic preparedness right before COVID hit.
And China was ranked low.
Relatively low, yes. And then 2020 happened, and the actual responses looked very different from the index's predictions.
So why was it seemingly so wrong? The video suggests it prioritized private health care.
Yeah, it allegedly weighted private hospitals and labs more heavily than, say, robust public health infrastructure. And it didn't really account for things like universal healthcare access or national coordination capacity.
Factors that turned out to be pretty critical.
Extremely critical. It points to maybe a Western-centric view, perhaps favoring market-based solutions over comprehensive public systems.
And like the Bloomberg one, this index also lost credibility.
According to the source, yes. The gap between the ranking and the reality of 2020 made it, well, another international joke, as the video puts it.
Moving away from health, the source also looks at credit rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, Fitch. How do they fit into this pattern?
Well, they show how powerful these seemingly objective financial tools can be. Their ratings, their downgrades, can literally affect the fate of companies, even whole countries.
The video gives an example. Moody's and a German company, Hannover Re.
Yes, alleging manipulation, suggesting that these agencies might use their power for, let's say, commercial leverage or pressure.
In their role in the Greek debt crisis back in 2009.
That's another key example. Downgrading Greek debt arguably intensified the crisis, showing the huge real-world impact these ratings can have, maybe even political influence.
The video also mentions them downgrading Chinese banks and China's sovereign debt, suggesting potential political or economic motives there too, like pressuring China on currency or benefiting foreign investors.
That's the implication raised in the source, yeah. The timing of some downgrades, coinciding with political friction, does raise questions about neutrality. And they often include these vague metrics like political stability.
How do you even measure something like political stability objectively?
That's the problem, isn't it? It's inherently subjective and open to interpretation, which can fuel suspicion about bias, especially when it consistently seems to disadvantage certain countries.
It sounds tricky. The Global Innovation Index also gets critiqued. China ranking relatively low despite obvious innovation leaps.
Yeah, the source points out that indicators related to the political system, things like the regulatory environment, ease of starting a business, that political stability metric, again, seem to pull China's ranking down.
And the speaker in the video was surprised by China's ranking on political stability specifically.
Yes, incredulous even, ranked 88th, which seems counterintuitive to many observers looking at China's governance record.
It does seem odd on the surface. Then there's the Economist's Safe Cities Index from 2019. Placing U.S. cities like Chicago ahead of Beijing or Shanghai.
Again, seemingly contradicting the lived experience or general perception of safety in those places. It made a lot of people question the methodology.
The host in the video noted that the Chinese public's reaction changed over time.
Yeah, from maybe initial concern to finding it almost amusing, suggesting a growing awareness, maybe even a dismissal of these kinds of Western evaluations as potentially biased.
Lastly, university rankings. How do they fit the pattern?
They often rely heavily on metrics that just inherently favor Western institutions. Research output in English, citations in Western journals, endowment size.
Things that universities in, say, the Anglo-Sport are more likely to excel at.
Exactly. It creates this self-reinforcing cycle. And the risk is it might push Chinese universities, for example, to chase metrics that aren't actually best for their own specific needs or national development goals.
Okay, so it paints a pretty consistent picture. Western ranking systems, potentially biased, influential, maybe not always reflecting reality accurately. What's the proposed solution in the video?
The big push is for independent analysis. For China, specifically, to develop its own indicator systems based on its own reality.
Resisting the pull of those Western indicators.
Yes, or at least understanding their limitations, recognizing that defining the metrics, setting the standards that is an act of power, political and commercial.
So the call is for Chinese scholars to create more realistic, fact-based alternatives.
Absolutely. Build high-quality Chinese standards, rankings, and ways of discussing progress, a discourse, if you will, that reflects China's own context and achievements. As China leads in more areas, the potential to become a standard setter grows.
The video mentioned an interesting phrase, strategically disdaining but tactically valuing Western indicators. What does that mean?
It's a nuanced idea, sort of. Don't blindly follow them. Be critical, strategically disdaining. But recognize they still have influence right now, so you need to understand them and engage with them when necessary, tactically valuing.
So be aware of their impact, but don't let them dictate your path.
Exactly. While you work on building your own robust alternatives for the long run.
The video also brings up the history of Western predictions about China often being wrong.
Right, which kind of bolsters the argument for independent judgment and skepticism towards external assessments that might not grasp the local context.
But these rankings do still have influence, despite flaws.
They do. Overcoming that takes time and effort. It means constantly questioning foreign indicators, but also, crucially, investing in original research, developing new theories, new indicator systems from the ground up.
Learning from how the West creates self-serving rankings, perhaps.
That's part of the suggestion, yes. Be aware of how it's done. And then focus on setting standards in areas where China's already leading, or where future importance lies. The video mentions things like poverty alleviation strategies, infrastructure building, developing smart cities, industrial parks, maybe even epidemic control methods, areas where China has unique experience and success.
And this isn't just a job for the government.
No, the source suggests both official and non-governmental efforts are needed. Think tanks, academics, researchers.
Using new tools, too, like big data, AI.
Potentially, yes. Leveraging those for more objective social research, but also, importantly, shifting resources back to basics. Fieldwork, deep data analysis, collecting original data, not just relying on existing, potentially biased data sets.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, the core message seems to be that while Western rankings are everywhere, they often come with built-in biases, political or commercial motivations, and methodologies that might not capture the full picture.
That's a fair summary, yes. And the source strongly advocates for China to step up and develop its own original, fact-based ways of measuring success and progress, rooted in its own experiences and goals.
It connects back to that broader idea of using Chinese discourse to describe Chinese practice, but applying it specifically to these vital indicator systems.
It's about building a more representative global understanding, one that reflects the diverse realities of a multipolar world, not just a single perspective.
Which leads to a final thought for you, the listener. We've talked about rankings for economics, health, safety, But think about other areas where global standards exist. Technology, environmental rules, even cultural norms. How might a world with multiple centers of influence change those benchmarks too? Could we see more diverse, more representative standards emerge across the board? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.